Hamas rejects the Egyptian proposal, and the rocket fire from Gaza does not cease, and that appears to be the case now. We are prepared to continue and intensify our operation to protect our people. And for this, we expect full support from the responsible members of the international community.
No deal. Egypt had proposed a ceasefire in Gaza. Israel accepted the Egyptian proposal, but the Hamas terrorists rejected it. Of course they did. They're terrorists. This is what they do. They're also enemies of Egypt. They want to oust the current Egyptian leader and install a Muslim Brotherhood Islamic government there too. Hamas has fired more than 1,000 rockets into Israeli territory, aiming for citizens. Israel has responded by precision targeting 1,500 terrorist installations in Gaza, each time warning civilians in advance to move. So how will this all end? Cliff May is the president of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. He joins us with more now from Washington. Cliff, you just got back from the Middle East. Tell me what you saw and heard personally.
Well, it's a pretty tense situation at the moment. The rockets had begun to be launched once again from Gaza. One night I was at a restaurant in Jerusalem, and we hear the sirens go, and we have to evacuate the restaurant. It's unusual for rockets from Gaza to go as far as Jerusalem. More often they go to the cities like Ashdod and Ashkelon and Sderot, which are adjacent to Gaza. But in this case, Hamas has better rockets, longer range rockets than they have had in the past. Another time I was at the airport as I was trying to leave, and again, the airport came under attack, and we had to be evacuated to a shelter. Now, very few of the rockets are hitting areas that have significant population. Why? Because Israel has something called Iron Dome, which is an anti-missile defense system built in cooperation with the U.S., and it's working extraordinarily well. It's hitting 90% of the missiles that would otherwise fall in a populated area, and the system can judge where the missiles are going to land. So it's a tense situation overall, and I would say Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, thought that Hamas would prefer to have a period of quiet. Certainly didn't think Hamas would want a ground invasion. He's been reluctant to do that, but Hamas persists. It keeps shooting off the missiles despite the ceasefire proposal that, as you note, came from Egypt and that Israel accepted.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Egypt and then Jordan. I mean, Egypt proposing a ceasefire, I mean, they're no friends of Hamas either. They don't like the prospect of a Muslim Brotherhood terrorist group in Gaza. I mean, the rockets are heading eastward right now, but that's also a base of terror against Egypt too, isn't it?
It is, and one might say that the best thing for Egypt is to let the Israelis go in and clean out Gaza of Hamas. On the other hand, I don't think that the Egyptians necessarily want to see a lot more damage there, and I think both the Egyptians and the Israelis agree upon this. If Hamas were to be entirely defeated, what would come next, and who's going to take responsibility? I don't think the Israelis want to take responsibility for Gaza again. I don't think the Egyptians, who had responsibility and administered Gaza prior to 1967, want to do that again. And I think there is some legitimate concern that if Hamas were to be totally defeated, you'd have groups like Palestinian Islamic Jihad, ISIS, which of course is in Syria and Iran, now calls itself the Islamic State, and these other groups which are no better than Hamas, in some ways worse, so it's an odd basis for comparison, that they might take over, or there might be absolute chaos reigning throughout Gaza. So I think for all those reasons, Egypt says, I don't see any good that's going to come by continuing this conflict. Let's try to get it stopped, at least for a while. And Hamas says no, and there's some mystery as to why Hamas wants to fight on.
I got one last question for you. I mean, this shows what happens when a terrorist base camp is created right next to Israel. I mean, anyone who thought Gaza would be anything other than a failed state or an armed camp, I think, was deluding themselves. But some people still want to hand over the West Bank to the Palestinians completely, like they did in Gaza. And I think that would be a 10 times or 20 times as much rocket disaster for Israel. But what happens if Jordan falls? On the map right now, we see Israel, West Bank on the southwest there, the border with Egypt. Sorry, that's the Gaza Strip on the border with Egypt. The West Bank is that red peanut-shaped area. And there's Jordan to the east. Now, Jordan also borders Syria and Iraq, where this new terrorist group called ISIS, this radical, even fiercer Al-Qaeda affiliate is conquering half the place. Are they trying to conquer Jordan also, and what would that mean?
Well, there's certainly speculation that this Islamic State, this terrorist army that is splintered from Al-Qaeda, their preference would be to go to Baghdad and take over Baghdad. That may be very challenging. I think that there will be a defense of Baghdad by the Shia, and they can't. So if they can't take Baghdad, where do they turn their guns? And one place very possible would be Jordan. They'd love to bring down King Abdullah II, no question about it. Now, I was in Jordan in recent days, and I would say that the Jordanians are confident but not complacent. They say this terrorist army has been able to defeat Iraqi troops, but the Iraqi forces have been undisciplined and not in good shape. When they went up towards Kurdistan, the Peshmerga, which is the Kurdish military, was able to defeat them. They say they can defeat them pretty easily, they believe, if they decide to come down and attack Jordan. There are also sympathizers with ISIS or the Islamic State inside Jordan, but the Jordanian authorities would say there's not so many of them. We know who they are. We're not terribly worried about them right now. The Jordanians are working very closely with the Americans on military matters and intelligence, and they're not shy to admit they're working very closely with the Israelis as well.
Cliff, isn't that amazing that Egypt and Jordan are unifying in some ways, at least, some degree at least, with Israel? We're out of time today, but I appreciate you joining us.